Welcome to the Coder Kids podcast. I'm James Thornock, and this is where we break down technology and what the future of coding looks like and what it's like to work in the workplace. So here on the program today, we have a special guest, and his name is Chris Hull, and he is the founder and CPO of Otus, and he's got some background as a teacher, as an educator, and as a father of four. Is that right?
Yeah, I got four kids, so crazy to think that we're here and I got four kids. It seems like a blur. Every kid just adds to the madness. So,
Yeah, well, that is exciting. So, well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I think to start things out, I'll ask you a little bit different question than we typically ask. We typically ask is, what originally got you interested in technology? But I want to ask you what kind of got you interested in education and in teaching in the first place. And did you always know that you wanted to be a teacher or work in education, or did that come later?
yeah, so when I was a kid, I thought I was going to be a basketball player. I had these high hopes and aspirations. For those who are watching us, you can tell in our our Discord channel or YouTube that I'm super tall. Now, you can't tell that at all nowadays that we're in the pandemic, but I'm 6'7". I thought I
Oh
was going
my
to be a
gosh.
basketball player. I played college basketball, D3 school, amazing school called Denison University outside Columbus, Ohio. Um, it was quickly apparent that I wasn't going to make it. I realized in high school I wasn't going to make it big, but I was like, I wanted to take it as far as I could. And when I was in college playing basketball, I was trying to find what was I passionate about. I was a history or world religions and political science major. It's really fun talking to people about things that they love to talk about, politics and religion, right? Those are just
Yeah.
hot topics with everybody. But through my education, I was trying to find a way to impact people. I've always enjoyed my teammates. I was a basketball counselor a lot, and I found this really cool opportunity tutoring, and I got into, man, I'm going to be a basketball coach and I will help kids on the side. That was like, oh, I'm going to do this. And then the more I got into learning about teaching, the more I became passionate about it. And
Hmm.
I was lucky enough to really see, I think if we think back to our education, I think you have an amazing, audience here who are trying to get their kids involved into something they're passionate about, coding and developing. Typically that comes from either a person or a teacher who just got them. They understood them. And I had a couple teachers like that, and I wanted to become that. Just like I was not the best basketball player in the world, I wasn't the best student in the world. And I wanted to be like a couple of my teachers who kept me interested, kept me wanting to learn. And I wanted to do that for the kids. And so I got into teaching. At first, I thought it was going to be college basketball coach. And then it was like, no, it's going to be high school. And then I ended up settling for middle school. I just absolutely loved seventh and eighth grade. It was the school I was in was sixth, seventh, and eighth grade,
Hmm.
but seventh and eighth graders, which a lot of people think makes me crazy. Who loves those middle school years? I know as a kid I hated them, but as a teacher, I just loved that seventh and eighth grade time period because you could make such an impact on kids as they were just awakening to who they were, what they wanted. You really could make an impact on the skills and the mindset they would need to succeed.
Well, that is really exciting. So we actually have a lot in common. I graduated major in history and a minor in philosophy. So right up that alley, I was actually debating on religion as my minor. So believe it or not. And I actually taught seventh grade social studies. So that's what I did. I did that for a year before joining Coder Kids. But yeah, funny how we both kind of got into that. And yeah, I love talking politics and religion and all that stuff that that's become a little bit more polarized in the past couple of years. But I got in right before the worst of it in college. So yeah, that's really funny. I really think you're absolutely right. Like, kids are definitely finding out who they really are and like who they're becoming, and that's when all the hormones are starting to hit, and they, guidance and passionate educators can definitely help if they can really see the students for who they are and their potentials. And yeah, I think that's when they stop, like when they stop becoming kids and they're starting to become like themselves. Is that, would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I definitely think that's accurate. I think that I know for parents and families who have kids that age, they're beginning to rebel at home a little bit more, beginning to find their independence. You know, my oldest is only 7, so I haven't gone there yet where my daughter still thinks I'm pretty cool most of the time. Definitely not all the time, but I definitely know that for those in those early teenage years, it becomes this, they're exploring themselves and they're first going to show that to their family. And in 7th and 8th grade, I always found that they were still willing to be approachable and willing to have a conversation with their teachers. They still had this idea of respect. When you get to high school, that is not always there. And high school kids are also amazing, but they're a little bit more sure of themselves. They're a little bit more committed, and they're a little bit further out of in their, sorry, further into their comfort zone. So there is that big difference between the, I'd say 11 to 14 range, 11 to 13 range versus 14 to 18. Maybe even 21, maybe 22. Some people never leave that age. Personally, I now, with Otus, I now work with adults. I found working with kids so much easier than adults. So I,
I'll have to ask you about that. Well,
I think adults are much more set in their ways. I think they're like, I know this. When I would do professional development for teachers, it was I could say this at the time, but teachers are the worst students. There's a running joke. You're a former educator. You almost become the students you teach. I kind of became more of that 7th, 8th grade mindset. You think you know everything, and professional development can be tricky. Teachers are teachers are amazing. My sister's a teacher. I was a teacher for 11 years. They have one of the most difficult jobs out there, but professional
100%.
development can be very tricky. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, professional development is really interesting because it's like you're trying to teach teachers who they already have a ton on their plate. There are a ton of hours of professional development and things that they need to take, and then they need to incorporate whatever they can and keep whatever they can. And it's really hard as a teacher, I think, and maybe this is some of the pushback that you received, to like reinvent the wheel every single time. And I think one of the draws of teaching in the profession and having this government job is like just the consistency of it. Like you can clock in, some teachers have the clock out mentality, some don't, but the routine's really nice. And if you've done it for however many years, look, I only did it for a year. I'm just going to be, really transparent. I did substitute teaching before that, obviously, to get ready for it. But I can see that the teachers that had done it for, even 2-3 years, in 3 to, 50 or however many years you can physically teach or mentally teach, depending on what hits you first. It's hard to incorporate new theories. So I take it you did have some ideas. Obviously, Otus is well, I don't want to spill all the beans. So if you want to talk about Otus and what that software is trying to solve in the education space.
yeah, definitely. So I think you hit on a couple of really big points. Like I think teachers, the biggest reward you get from teaching is that connection with kids. And when you really talk to people who've been in, I'm still, close friends with some of the teachers I was with who've been there for 30, 40 years. And the idea is you want to be able to connect to the kids. And one of the things that can become frustrating is the profession requires you to be constantly, 9 months a year. People look at it and it's like, yeah, those 9 months, you're putting in the hours of a full-time person for the year, then you get the reward of the summer. But the idea is, how do we get the ability to connect to kids? And so the way that I think this really relates to why Otus was started was I felt like all the initiatives a district is trying to pursue. I think school districts have so much on their plate. I think that the pandemic really expose some of the things that schools are doing, from providing before school, after school programs, providing food, providing shelter, providing, the necessities for kids. It became really apparent of just how much schools are providing when
Hmm.
that was kind of taken away. But when I was teaching, it became one of those things where every few years there would be another initiative in our district. So, what's the initiative this year?
Teachers
And
are
so,
rolling their eyes right now. It's
yeah,
like very, very true.
so it's like, and again, if you were there long enough, I remember being there. I taught for 11 years, but in like year 5 or 6, we had an initiative, and all of a sudden, a couple of my colleagues were like, "We saw this one 10 years ago," and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It was like there was this cycle of this constant returning of like, "Oh, this initiative is just rebranded with a new name." And all of a sudden it goes like, okay, we're going to do progress monitoring, or RTI and MTSS. And there are all these acronyms. I'm throwing out jargon for too many people, but there's this thing where it's like it cycles back. Um, so one of the things that was happening was I replaced a teacher who was just incredible. She was I called her a tornado of energy. She was a tornado of good. She has had this ability to connect with kids for decades, and I was fortunate enough to replace her. I was trying to do her job, and she had all these ways. Kids had a journal. She was checking in. She did these things that now I think are pretty amazing, where it was almost like a one-on-one, which when we get to the dev world, that's really how a lot of these management systems are set up, where you have a manager, and then as an IC, an individual contributor, you'll have a one-on-one, like, how do I get better? You have this weekly check-in, this weekly cadence. It's really about
Yeah.
improvement. She, as a teacher, was doing all this, and I was like, how in the world is one human being connecting to 150 people? She shared with me her entire notebook. It was like a spiral notebook, like a 5-star notebook for those that are brand
Hmm.
aficionados. But she would have this check-in, and I would be like, I can't do this. Like, this work is like incredible. So I used technology from that point in year 1 and 2 as my hack.
Gotcha.
People still look at me. I'm like, I need a way to become more efficient and effective at my job. And I really look at technology to help me do that. I think when you really break down what is technology, it's really taking the tools out there to make you more efficient and effective. And it really becomes apparent and needed to know, what am I trying to accomplish? Right? If I'm trying to accomplish, again, I had 150 students, 6 classes, that's about 25 kids per class.
Hmm.
One of the things that would happen is like, how do you get to know all those kids? Well, a great way to do that is through journaling and writing. And so one way to do that in terms of journaling and writing is, okay, everybody has a notebook, which is what my predecessor had. It was, okay, then they turn in that notebook. And then all of a sudden on the weekend, she would like read all the notebooks for all the kids. And I was like,
Wow.
I still like to play basketball. I still like to have fun. I had a family. I'm like, I don't, devoting like 6-8 hours to read all these journals, just that was, but again, the motivation is good.
Yeah.
Writing is a way to see how someone thinks, and when you learn how someone thinks, you can really unlock so much within them. So I really said, okay, what's a more efficient and effective way to do this? And so at the time, it came through blogging. So all my kids would have a blog that was private to me, and all of a sudden I was beginning to be able to read it. So that way, when all of a sudden I was in class, all of a sudden, if they were doing a project, they were collaborating, I could scroll through their blog. Or when I would have my one-on-ones with my kids, which I would, originally it was once a month. I actually, by the end, I was almost once every 2 weeks. I would check in with the kids. I'd be like, hey, is there something going on? We would look at their blog together, and we'd be able to engage and have these conversations. So
Hmm.
technology really stemmed from my need to live up to the expectations of my predecessor and become more efficient and effective. And so started with blogging. It then transpired to being able to help individualized learning. It was actually one of my co-founders at Otus. His name's Pete. He's still an educator in Illinois. We began wanting to do a menu of options because we really believed in differentiation. So we almost wanted a menu. So I would teach the U.S. Constitution, and the idea would be like, hey, are you more a video person? Do you like I Am a Bill? I mean, like, do you want the preamble back to like Schoolhouse Rock to get really
Yeah.
nostalgic? Like, what is the way? Now, some people love to read, but I wanted to provide like 5-6 options for each idea so that the kids could either consume, one or two. Some of my kids wanted to do all of them. And then we would evaluate their, the ability to critically think independently, and critically the ability to think read and write is kind of what we would evaluate.
Yeah.
So that all started. So this is a long way. As you can tell here, James, I'm a history teacher. Sometimes we go on these tangents.
Oh man, I'm
guilty
of the same thing.
How did this bring this to Otus? Well, the idea was I was lucky enough to write a grant to bring one device to every kid. And this was all the way back in 2010. I co-wrote this grant with Pete, and we got these devices, and I thought the technology was going to be the be all end all. I thought I was just going to unlock everything. But what became apparent is professional development was critical, but there wasn't a platform to do all this in one place. So instead of all of a sudden being scattered with one notebook or 150 notebooks, but then some other project, there was no platform to do it all. And so I was lucky enough to meet our third co-founder. His name's Andy. And we really began to build a platform to be able to help educators and students, but then also families and also administrators to be able to teach, grade, analyze, and then plan. And so the idea of teaching is kind of what everybody experienced this year with the pandemic, getting those activities out to kids where it's like a playlist of activities. It could be videos, it could be readings, it could be activities in other ed tech softwares. Then there's this idea of grading, which is really the measurement of learning. And the idea is like, how are you doing? And again, if we wait just for a test at the end of the month or the end of the grading period, that's not really giving enough insight. So if we can make the grading simpler, smaller, more iterative, we'd get a better sense of how the kid was doing. And then analyze is putting all this information into one place. So we have these national tests that kids take, and we have these classroom tests. We have their passions, their interests. We have their blogs, their portfolios, all of these things that live with a kid. Again, I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and then twin 3-year-olds. They all have these collections. And it's like, okay, digitize them, put them all in one platform. Now there's this like standard profile of, hey, this is what they're passionate about. And then with all that information, with the teaching facilitated, with the measuring of learning happening, with all the information pulled together, we then also in Otus can plan what are they going to need? What are the interventions? What accesses do they need? What programs do they need? And then we just iterated it on over and over again. And this, trying to relate this back to what this podcast is for those in the development world, for those coders, those are the same things that developers are doing. You build this infinity loop around build, measure, analyze, and then build, remeasure. It's like you're getting into this thing over and over again. We have, on our team at Otus, we have our QA, quality assurance. They're embedded onto the team along with our UX, UI people, so that our developers aren't just building something in isolation. The idea is you're building, the QA's looking at it, and the UX, you're collaborating either in an office or on a Zoom, and you can iterate faster. And that type of mindset, I think, is just really valuable, and the best teachers do it. And we hope we provide the tools so that every teacher has that ability. And I know that was a long tangent. There are probably a lot of questions out there. But yeah, that's really what we do at Otus, is we're kind of, it was like the one-stop shop for everything that would have been going on during the pandemic. You could have gone to one place to get the lessons your kid needed to do, to take the test, to see how they're doing, to see their grade book, and then kind of plan for their graduation or their 6th, 7th grade, what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's really pretty incredible. I think, again, any teachers out there or any people who are familiar with the teaching profession, there is a lot of fragmentation when it comes to what software you're using. You're going to use Zoom for this, you're going to use PowerPoint for this, you're going to use anyway. And like the software for grades is different and highly unreliable in the district that I used to work in. When too many teachers were submitting grades at the same time, it would just like break the system. You're familiar with that kind of stuff. So, which is wild that like submitting grades, which are, like, let's be honest, it's not a lot of data, right? Like in terms of like ones and zeros. It's like it's a lot of data in terms of actual information, but not in terms of like what a computer has got to put in one, take from one place to put to another. YouTube, for instance, can just like vacuum up whole video files like it's no big deal, right? So a lot of it has to do with infrastructure, but a lot of a lot of schools and a lot of these systems were developed and brought about by like kind of massive companies, and a lot of them are pretty clunky and old. So obviously, what you're proposing and what you're working on is totally different. It's unified. I imagine I haven't used the software myself, obviously, but the idea at least is to be unified and quick and yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it really, one of the things you kind of talk about is some of these older systems were built on local servers in the school that would all of a sudden
Yeah.
have it. And so, there are other ed tech companies out there that are modernizing all this, but that was one of the things we set out to do. We want to bring what is like considered normal, or just what you see with YouTube or Google or AWS, Amazon. These are things that are just like, table stakes. It's what they're supposed to be. We
Hmm.
want to bring out, so I like to think of us as like an education technology, not ed tech, because we don't want to shortchange anything. We have our technologists, and that's really, I lead our delivery team and working with them so that, yeah, we can scale on demand. We can see if all of a sudden there's, if some districts using it, well, Amazon's going to scale for us. We work with developers who are absolutely incredible. We're coding in the latest languages. And the idea here is we want to bring the best practices that exist for YouTube or banking institutions. Why, like, that also relates to security, some of
Yeah.
this ed tech
Hmm.
security. It's like super important. Like, we really want to be considered, top of the line in our security. We want to be considered the ability to transcode videos, which is what YouTube's able to do so well. It's like, we want to be able to take that stuff and to bring that to schools so that they're not dealing with unreliable internet or unreliable entry of data or unreliable access. There's a situation where it's like, if you're not available, that's paramount to be able to be used. We want Otus to be just part of the process, but almost, we kind of use the analogy for those with like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or a Whoop, whatever device you might wear. It's like, it's got to be seamless. If it was a 20-pound backpack you're wearing, you're not going to wear it. You want it to fit on your wrist. You want it to fit into what you're wearing. You want it to be lightweight and comfortable so that you can collect the needed information. And with that
Yeah.
information, we can empower teachers to make their choices. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And when teaching, this is all to focus on kids, right? It's like so much of the teaching profession gets in the way of, getting that one-on-one time with the kid, doing these check-ins like you're talking about, like, and and everything you said is focused on making sure that you could do these things, but you weren't able to fully do what you wanted to do without some technology that you were able to create. Well, and I'm glad that you've been able to take it full time. I mean, that is really inspiring. So let's think about parents and kids, in this moment. We've had a lot of different guests on the podcast that talk about finding their way into coding, like pretty much sideways, right? A lot of people had different degrees, different degree plans, but they wanted to find a solution. And coding is a little bit magic in that you can create solutions, right? Out of basically nothing, right? If you have a computer and if you have a team, you can make that happen. Now, there are lots of different roles to be had when creating software and engineering hardware and all sorts of things. Your particular role, you're the chief product officer, right? So you're in charge of the vision of what the product is supposed to look like, if I'm not mistaken. Is that accurate?
You're right. You're completely right.
So how, let's say there's a kid who's interested in that kind of role. What does that look like on the everyday? How do you work with the team? How do you interface with them? How do you communicate with developers? That kind of thing. What do they have to look forward to?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I'll touch on what I do, but then I'm also happy to kind of talk about our entire team. I was lucky enough to, as one of the co-founders, build out our team into the various roles we have. So we have things called teams, which is repetitive, but it's in other organizations they might be known as squads. So our teams are broken up, and we have three product teams. So we have assessments, LMS, which is learning management system is short, so LMS, and then we have user management. So in Otus, you can have 4 users. You can have either family users, student users, teacher users, or administrator users. So user management is really important, being able to connect with other systems, have our system talk to others, and having the user manager work. So when we look at that product team, we have, so let's look at assessment, for example. They're the ones who build our assessments, which help us measure how a kid's doing. We have ICs, which are individual contributors, and so those are our developers. We tend to like full stack developers just because as we're in like the growth stage. It's always nice to have very flexible people out there who can do front end and back end. As we've grown, though, we're now almost 75 people. We've now begun to have specialists in front end or back end, so that can happen. Individual contributors are the ones, as you said, they do the magic. They put together the actual code to be able to be used. And when I look at coding, I think the magic really is and when people always ask me, like, what skills do I need to learn to be a developer, to be a coder? It's development, writing code, is being able to write. It's really amazing where now you're writing, differently, but it's logic and writing. If you're a good writer and you're able to communicate your ideas, you're able to code it. And one of the things that gets into the product role, we have a product owner. So each team has a product owner, and the product owner has a couple hats that they wear. So a product owner one of their hats is to be the voice of the customer, because we want to make sure that the customer, in our situation, students, depending on the role, students and teachers or families and administrators, they're represented in the process. Something might be like, well, this is like technically the best way to do it. But if technically the best way to do something isn't going to be how someone actually uses it, then it doesn't matter. So the product owner wears the voice. True. It's kind of, So it's like, this is like what we think is best. Well, it's like, this is how it's actually going to happen. There's like famous, visuals or pictures out there where you might have like a sidewalk that goes around the corner. But if someone cuts across and does that, they're going to cut across. And that's how people use software. Sometimes it's like the intended use is to go to this part of the application. I'm going to click here. But if there's a way to get there faster, people are going to tend to do that. So the voice of the customer is represented by the product owner, in addition to understanding the acceptance criteria. Now, acceptance criteria are often written by multiple people. But what is acceptance? It's like, what is going to make this successful?
Yeah.
So understanding like what is the objective, writing out some of these things. And so we use something called Jira, which is basically a tracking software for our developers. So we have this idea of the product owners there. We have the developers who are writing the code. We also have engineers and tests, which I short call them QA. They're also developers and they're also writing code, but they're trying to break things. So the actual ICs or the developers, they're building things. They're the ones who love to build worlds. They're able to build stories. They're being able to put things into logic that's understandable. One of the things that often happens is you have to account for every which way something's going to happen. So it's like if you're going to do simple math, or if you're going to do simple parameters, like let's use a simple example about like, I'm going to write a blog. That's something I mentioned earlier in the conversation. Okay, I need an interface to write a blog. Well, what's the character count? That actually matters. It's like infinite is not possible. You can't code for infinite because there is no infinite logic. You have to put something in. Now you can code for it to cycle through, and it's like we're going to paginate at after a page, like after 5,000 characters, we'll paginate, and then you can say like we'll do that for 100,000 pages. But there's always a limit. Even Amazon, even Google, there's a limit. Again, I don't know. I had one of my students go into a Google Doc one time and they copy and pasted, and they just copied and pasted over and over. And then there is a limit in the Google Doc. You'd be shocked.
Wow. Yeah.
But it's like, it's this idea, and kids are amazing. Kids will break things. So
they'll find limits very, very quickly. Whenever we have, we do summer camps and after school programs, and the first thing that kids do whenever they see like a box that they can type numbers into, they'll type numbers till the numbers go off of the screen and they'll crash the program really quickly. Or they'll put like the meow sound in a forever loop. So that's another fun thing. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So if you have the mindset to break things and you like to code and develop, really that's engineering and test. The idea is like, okay, I want to take what you've built and I want to break it. That's really what QA is supposed to do. They're supposed to take the normal workflow, but then also the workflows that are not expected, thinking outside the box. Like, sure, you're writing, as we said, you're trying to, write a paragraph. Well, if you don't put a space into something, that can sometimes break it because some code needs a space because it's then going to cut off to the next line. Or, it's like these infinity, cat sounds and things like that. They're all sorts of things. So our engineers and tests are trying to break what the developers coded. And then we have a UX and UI, and they're the people who also do a little bit of coding. They're working with the front end, the CSS, and they're trying to make sure that we are consistent with our use so that you know how something works, that we have the consistency of buttons and the workflow and so UI UX is user interface, user experience. We want to make sure that the interface and the experience are consistent, easy to use. And then again, the product owner is making sure that what's being built matches the voice of the customer. And so that means that the product owner has to be really attuned to various groups. So in our situation, we have something called Intercom, which is a chat support system. And we provide chat support for every adult in the system. So we therefore track the conversations that are happening with our client success team. So our client success team is, supporting our users. We can then look at the metrics and say, wow, a lot of people are using, this is what happened during the pandemic. We had this lesson feature, which is a playlist of activities. It was used before the pandemic, but all of a sudden last March, everybody went from using it, periodically to it was being used every single day by every single teacher. You'd put all your activities in there because what would happen before would be like, you would have like a shell of what you would do in our lessons. But what would happen is like, oh, here's a packet, here's this, or we're going to do this, it's called pair share. I'm going to pair you up into two and you're going to share things. Well, now everything had to be documented online because it was remote. So all of a sudden the use cases and the types of lessons we were having were very different. So we were able to track in our system, hey, we're getting a lot more usage of lessons. Great. That's a lot. A lot of development is into metrics. You want to be making data informed decisions. So we see our lesson use is going way up. We see that there are a lot more questions about the feature, like our help articles aren't helping. So what we do first is like, let's help improve our help articles, what's possible. We can think of things differently. But then it was like, oh man, we need to do things differently than we had. Like a really tangible example was we had assessments in Otus, which are again measuring. They were never really linked to lessons in the past because teachers before COVID were like, I want to transition my kid from the lesson to the test. Because I want to make sure they're understanding. I want to have a conversation. I don't want them headphones on, locked into the screen. Well, now that they're remote, they needed that transition to take place. So now it's like, I want to embed my assessments into my lesson so that a kid can progress through everything on their own speed. We were able to develop that. So what ended up happening, we saw the chats, we saw the metrics driving the usage, driving the need. We had conversations. We interviewed a couple people. We have a UX researcher who pulls that all together into a research brief. We then bring that to our UX team. They understand it. We talk it through. The developers are there. They're thinking through things. Okay, we have these elements of Otus. Let's reuse them so that we have a standard component library so the buttons and things work the same. QA's listening in the back of their mind. They're a part of the discussion. We then set out to build. And as I said, it's like really collaborative where how many activities is each lesson going to have? Well, that comes from the voice of the product. Okay, the product owner is going to say, hey, this is the number of activities we're going to have. Great. UX, how do we want those to be laid out? They're going to tell. The developers making all of this stuff happen. QA is going to be like, well, what happens if I hit 200 activities? Well, we need an error message to say like we're stopping here. Or what happens if we add the context? So all of a sudden that team really becomes this cohesive unit, iterating on it. We produce it. It goes from kind of a mock-up or a prototype that's quickly put together. Then we actually develop it. We put it into the software. And all of that can happen within as little as 2 weeks because we release every 2 weeks. So all of that conversation, I'm kind of making a big deal. Now, a larger project maybe takes several weeks to do, but it's this idea of, depending on how you think, if you're the person who likes to write What are the requirements? What is acceptance? That's much more product, right? You like to research, you like to understand how do the 12 competitors do it compared to Otus. That's really the product owner's job. This is what our competitors do. This is what our users actually need. I'm the voice of the customer. If you're the mindset of I want to break things because I just love to see what I can break, that's really like an engineer and test. And if you like to
Mm-hmm.
build and to write and to make things usable, that's your IC, your developer. And if you like to make things really, if you have like an attention to detail, I'm telling you, some of our UX people, they can tell things when they're like 3 pixels off. This is
Yeah.
off center. It's
Yeah,
like,
that's
oh
my
man, like if
wife.
we change the workflow, it's like that attention to detail. If we put something here, one less click, that's really the UX person. And it's like there's like a little bit of an art there. Um, but yeah, that's kind of depending on your mindset, the role you could potentially have.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I mean, you went over so many roles, and we've been over some of these roles before. My uncle does UX for Capital One, so we had a whole podcast just on that topic. And then obviously we've done development, and I think we could probably spend a little bit more time on quality assurance in future episodes, parents, if you're interested in that kind of thing. But I looked at your About Us and all the people that were working for the company, and I had to scroll way, way, way down to find you, Chris. And I think if you mouse over Chris's portrait, you'll see him doing a slam dunk. So I was actually going to ask about your height, but you said 6'7", right? That's you have a 15 inches on me, but it's great because we look like the same height.
Yeah, we
But-
looked at same height. That was a funny. That was during the pandemic. I had a midlife crisis about, man, can I still do that? And it was like I had to let it go. And then people didn't believe me, so I put it
Ah,
up there. So
that's awesome. So you can find that at otus.com. But so I was looking at the map, and you have people where I live in Texas. You have people obviously in Illinois, in Chicago, where it's originally based. But you call it a remote first company, and people in like Alaska, I think too. Anyway, lots all over the place. So my question is, if I'm a kid and I'm growing up, I'm looking to be a part of a company in the future. What percentage of the job market, and look, you don't have to have solid data on this, but what's your intuition? Is a lot of the work going to be remote work moving forward? Is that influenced by the coronavirus pandemic? And were y'all remote before that time, or so if you can speak to kind of remote work in the future versus like in person, in office work.
yeah, so a little bit of the history of Otis is so we started out with a proof of concept we wanted to build back in 2013, which seems so long ago. It's absolutely incredible. And so what a lot of software does is they will sometimes we actually are one of our co-founders, Andy, he had a company that was based in Brazil. And so we used a couple developers there to kind of build this proof of concept to get it off the ground.
Mm.
So I was used to some remote work, and we then really liked it. We're like, man, this is going well. This makes sense. I was using it in my classroom. I'm like, we're going to expand this. We're going to get even bigger.
Sweet.
And so we began to build our own development team. And so we then had this, and we still use, we still have this amazing team. They're absolutely incredible. We still have a couple people who have remained with us from the beginning in Brazil. So we always had a mix between Brazil and Chicago. We built out our Chicago team, and it was really great at this stage to be able to have people in office, to be able to get up on a whiteboard and to be able to kind of brainstorm together.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden began to change because what we found is the best people like to be everywhere. And so even before the pandemic hit, we were beginning to be a hybrid office where we'd be some of us would be in the same office and some of us wouldn't. And then the pandemic hit. And so I'm fortunate enough where I try to talk to, one of the things I would give as, a piece of advice is I was not good at this, but to be able to network, to be able to talk to people, to be able to learn. One of the things I've tried to grow at personally is this idea of like trying to network to say, like, what do other companies do? And I've gotten better over time. And so to kind of get to the core of your question is, I really think the on a delivery team in the development world, you're going to have distributed teams where a lot of the work is going to be remote, but there is going to be moments for in person. Like we're going to be once we get a little bit further, when everybody gets vaccinated and all this, we're going to have all our developers come together and kind of have like a summit. And one of the things that's interesting is this is how like sales teams have worked for a long time. You'd have like your
That's
regional
actually true.
people,
Yeah.
you'd have your regional salespeople, and then you'd come together for a summit. And so that's kind of what we're going to in the delivery model. And I've heard the same thing. So I talk to people in California. I talk to people in Texas. In Austin and some of these tech hubs.
Yeah.
We have nearly 40 people on our delivery team, and they used to be primarily based in Chicago. Well, some of the people in Chicago, since we're now remote, they're moving. We got people going to Nashville, to Denver. Someone went to Florida, so we're now spread across the country, and we're seeing success. I think that in terms of the ability to work remotely, you have things like Slack, you have things like, Zoom or Discord. All of these things work great for distributed work so that you can, as you did notice, we have people in 6 different time zones at Otus. It can make things a little bit, you have to really think, you have to be flexible. We have like core business hours for Chicago, it's 10 to 4, right? So our core business hours. And so East Coast, yeah, okay, they're 9 to 3, for their but we try to keep people 10 to 4 to at least have some overlap. And it really allows us to hire the best people, and it really allows us to kind of collaborate. And so I think from everybody I've talked to, from all the other companies and all the other leaders I've talked to, this is like the new present. This isn't the future. This isn't what's coming. We're really seeing that. And we're seeing that remote work can be possible with the only thing that's lost a little bit is that culture, that culture building. It's, I always would tell people, it's like the little moments, getting to know people. When you would hold the door open for a meeting, or you would sit next to somebody in a meeting, you would talk to them. You'd have this like little bit of chit chat, this like filler conversation. When you're on a Zoom, there is no filler conversation because you're broadcasting it. Well, you're broadcasting it to 12 other people. It's like, this doesn't even make sense. Like that little side conversation where, I know, James, you were telling me earlier, like I think your wife's from Naperville, right? And the idea is like, this was like a side conversation before we got on this podcast. It was like, cool. I have family in Naperville. Oh my goodness. We could kind of talk about that. If we were in another meeting, it would have been like, oh man, you were a history teacher. All of a sudden that comes out, and it's all of a sudden that little moment happens. And one of the things that can take place, and one of the things is, I wish worlds were perfect, but there could be moments of tension, right? There might be a moment where a developer is going, in order for the scalability of something to work. Actually, I'll use a really good example, because this was actually from last week. We're having a new feature come out, and it's going to be super cool. It's going to be about progress monitoring for kids. And we want the progress monitoring for kids to be live, just like Google Docs, right? Oh, wow. So that if somebody updates something into a template, which is kind of like the structure of it, if I update it, we want it to go live everywhere. And technically, that's a really big feat. So there is this like moment of tension between the product owner and the developer, who is like, well, in order to do this, we need an extra, couple weeks to be able to build in that functionality. And it's like, well, we want this feature out for the summer. So now all of a sudden you're getting this. It's like, is it a requirement? It's like, yes. In order for this to be successful, well, there's this moment like, well, do you realize we might have to, there's something called an MVP, right? The minimal viable product, because we want to release and then iterate. So there's this idea of, well, in order to make our MVP date, if we do this feature, what are we not going to do? So there's that like moment of tension, because it's like someone has to say no, and someone has to say like, okay. And when you know somebody and it's like, oh yeah, we've talked, and like, it's not just like, it's less contentious. It's more of a team building thing. People, that some people might, when they're communicate, when they communicate, they might be a little bit shorter or a little bit more brief, or somebody might be very verbose. Like, you learn those things not in a Zoom call. You learn those things through interactions, as I like to say, like the holding the door open for somebody, or like, hey, we have 5 minutes. Let me share this quick idea. And that's the thing that I think remote work is trying to balance, because the productivity, the individual work, like the development, that's all possible. Sending code to the cloud, all that works. but it's that team collaboration, being able to really have that iterative nature, because I think a lot of people are going to relate to this. It's like group projects. I don't know how many group projects happen this year, but that's what development is.
Hmm.
Development's like a large group project. I know very few people who can code everything themselves unless you're a startup. But once you get into an organization, you have that collaboration. You need to be able to hand off that baton, hand off, hey, here's my code. You check it out. There is, you peer reviews, peer PRs, you're reviewing code. You need to rely on your teammates. You're not going to be able to be an expert in everything. Some of our earliest application at Otus was designed by me. That was a horrible decision. Now we have a UX team that's amazing. They create apps. Our UI, our UX is so much better. Occasionally, if you stumble into the deep parts of Otus, you'll see some of the stuff I created, and it's like, tried my best, but that wasn't my specialty. And being able to find those people who, man, I'm great at the front end, or I'm great at the back end, or I'm great at breaking things, like finding what you're great at and then learning to work with somebody and collaborate. That's how you can become even more successful.
Yeah, yeah. And what you said right there about finding what you're great at, really, really pursuing that, that's kind of the tough part too. You have to kind of dink around and figure out what stuff you're not good at, and there's a lot of iteration, but we've heard that same thing from so many people, and that really solutions in the modern context of technology really require teams. There are very, very, very few things, very few video games, very few professional software solutions that are created by just a single individual. It's a vanishing thing for sure. Well, I also wanted to ask you about education. You are definitely an educator. You're definitely in that realm of education. I feel like similar in terms of, I really care about education, educational outcomes. We want those to improve. I think I'm motivated, at least in part, by the poor performance of the public school system in the United States, and wanting to give every child the opportunity to experience or be exposed to coding at some level. And that's what I'm motivated by. Whether they are going to incorporate coding into their career or not is not necessarily my objective, but just letting them get a feel for it to see, hey, is this something that really they can get and understand and really run with? And a certain percentage of our students really do. So that said, if you could blow up the education system, not any schools, we don't advocate violence, but and start a new system, what would that system look like? And you could say just on a district level or on a national level or whatever you want. It's an open-ended question, but what system do you think might help students out a little bit better?
So this is like, if I could start from scratch
Yeah,
and build
basically.
something out. So one of the things that's kind of crazy is I kind of put, as I stall and tell you I'm thinking, trying to put this in words.
It's a big question, so take all your time you need.
One of the things that I think is so important is that I think there are some parts of what we do that make a lot of sense. And there are some things that you'd want to have consistency on. One of the things that I think is actually hard for our country, and this is going to make me sound like way out there, but it's like, it's hard to find some consistency between districts. Like, people are going to move, right? And the fact is, my wife's from Michigan, she moved a lot, and it's like, I talk to people, it's like, if you move from Michigan to Idaho or to Texas, wherever you move, there can be such a change, and the systems don't talk really well to each other. Like in
not
Texas,
at all.
you have your Texas standards, and it's like, I know people don't want to hear it, but like, having simplified standards that we're trying to achieve. And to me, I think education should really be about, are you able to read, write, and think critically and independently? And then do math, right? But like, math is a little bit different. But if you really focus on, can you read, can you write, and can you think critically and independently? That's where I think like social studies should be a supplemental subject to English. I think science is the same way. It should be supplemental to these other things. Now, there should be some math standards. Those are super important because it gets to logic. But there's this idea of, okay, that's our main focus. Now, the rest, so simplify the core, right? I think it's absolutely unbelievable that we have, like thousands of standards. I think now, again, I know we need a measure and you need to build and you'll go from like step 1 to step 2.
Sure.
But if we could really focus on just that simplicity of like, hey, these are our core things. I also think that gets into communication. And I think communication is where we get into this world of languages. So my kids are in a dual language program. In part, I joke around a lot. I'm on the 20-year program to learn Spanish. I've been trying to learn Spanish for like 20 years. I can speak it. In a pinch, I could like get passable. I'm not good at conjugating verbs and talking in the past tense. I always add like en el pasado, like just in the past. Like I'm talking like in the past. I don't remember how to conjugate. But that's really where, if we got kids able to read, write, and think critically and independently, if we got them into languages so that the people who I've experienced in my life who have the best code, the best developers, are often bilingual or multilingual themselves, not including code, because learning how to code is learning to speak a different language. And when you can unlock that ability, we have this amazing developer on our team, speaks 3 languages. And there was somebody who used to work at Otus, and he's gone on to amazing things. He could speak 5 languages. And the idea is like he had 5 languages he could speak, but then what was his best skill in terms of his ability to code? He could pick up any language he wanted in terms of a coding language. He could jump back and forth because he saw those parallels between Italian and French. He's like, oh, this is, like once you learn those patterns, all of a sudden your ability just to think like that becomes exponentially better.
And so he was nimble. Okay.
Yeah, the nimble mindset, like this idea of like, if you are bilingual, your brain doesn't like, I think like I have to take a word like blue. Oh, in Spanish, what is blue? Azul. Like it's like that. It's that basic. I'm going 1 for 1, plug and play. Like, what do I want to say in English? I have to think it out, and then I have to translate it to Spanish. But when I talk to my son and daughter, like they're like, I was out playing with them, this summer, and it was just like Mariposa, like it was this butterfly. My son couldn't even know the word in English. He was like, no, that's just a Mariposa. Like he just saw the Spanish word. And one of the things that I think would be really great is to be able to simplify the core things that we're doing, focus on less so that we could give more time then to let kids explore. And I think being able to create this plan for each kid, like we're going to do this core set. You're going to be, if you can read, write, and think critically and independently, you can do anything. You can go teach yourself how to put in a kitchen sink. You can teach yourself these incredible things. But then once you have that core, let more flexibility. So like I kind of want strict, constant, consistent, like here are the 5, 6 skills we're working on, so that if you went from Maine or Nebraska to Colorado to Alabama, okay, you have the core of these like basic skills, but then the rest should be really opened up to be flexible. And there should be this like almost this individualized education plan, which is used for special education. Like every kid should have this kind of IEP out there that can be kind of intervened. And it's like, okay, they have the core set. Well, what do you want to explore this year? I think it should be really collaborative. I really wish that there was more things that, again, if you look at college, like you would have an advisor. I had an amazing advisor. I had one in high school too. Like having somebody who you could like touch back in with and say, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. Okay, explore this. Like, oh, I really want to get into coding. Okay, you have your core down. Now take some time to learn that is your language. It doesn't have to be, a world. Again, I learned this year, like it's not a foreign, it's a world language, right? World languages like Russian, Italian, all of these things. Coding is a world language. And the idea is, okay, that can be something. Maybe you want to take 2 world languages. Maybe you're into Spanish and you want to learn Node. Okay, great. Angular. You want to learn something like this. Like, awesome. I think that's really where, if I could really go back, it's like, yeah, let's limit the base and then let's really get engagement about learning. Because when you become passionate about learning, when you see people with success, it's because they are able to identify something and then they can teach themselves to a point, and then they can still collaborate and they can get to this point of breaking. And then I really think that would just be really powerful. And then if you had this individualized plan that lived with the kid and could transfer between schools, between states, and you're building towards it, it would be balanced by the classroom measurement and then
Mm-hmm.
like a national measurement. Just because I do think, not that no kid is a single number, but there's this idea. It's like, okay, what is the national benchmark? Okay, just as like, it's like a mile marker on the highway. If
Sure.
you were to go off-roading and you have nowhere like, you're going to get there, but it's like having that mile marker could keep you just attuned to what's going around you. I
Yeah.
don't know if that made sense. I'm now going to be thinking, you had me going on this. I'm going to be like building my own school system in my brain for a little bit here.
Well,
That was a
great.
great question.
So I asked that question of a lot of people, and yeah, I don't think it's asked often enough because I constantly thought about it. Obviously, during my first year of teaching, was like, man, there's a lot of things I'd like to be different, and so I'd constantly struggle with this question because I think we could be doing a lot better as a nation, but also just Texas, where I was, just my district could be doing a lot better within that realm. So you're certainly not the only person to advocate for a sort of national system of some sort. Common Core by a different name or something a lot simpler and straightforward that you could have a national standard. I think a lot of people are behind that. And then there are some people, libertarian types and homeschool types that are like, I don't want any kind of standard. I'm going to free range my kid. And, at Cutter Kids, we support that too, right? So we don't necessarily have we're not behind a system, but I do think the only at the end of the day, I think what we believe as Coder Kids is just that the best educational outcomes are decisions that are made between teachers, parents, and students, and instead of like bureaucrats on average, right? It's like teachers that are passionate about teaching, that care about education. Obviously standards need to be there, and you're not going to get just like a national standard from just a lone teacher, but a lone teacher could help say, hey, like these are some national standards that we can use to reference. But I think it really comes down to that interaction between, parent, teacher, and child, and whatever system that can enable that and empower teachers to have the time to do that and parents to take the time out. I think you're going to see pretty good outcomes. But so I love your thoughts. I love your thoughts on it. I mean, there's a lot of it's kind of all over the board what I've heard. Although some of the things that you say, a lot of other people have said as well. So
I think it's if you were to relate this back, there's certain coding standards, right? There's certain interoperability standards where it's like, hey, AWS says this, and it's like those have to be simple. And when they're simple, then they can be followed. And then when they're followed, you get this connectivity, impact, this networking impact. And again, it's been tried. Like there's the Common Core, and I'm not trying to I want each district and I want to empower people to make their own choices, but in many ways, it's got to be simplified, right? In order to really have some of this interoperability, it's got to be more simple. And I think it's, as you said, it's essential that the stakeholders are put in, and they're amazing experts from those who with families and those who are students and those who are teachers and admins, and they're doing an incredible job navigating this uncharted territory we're in. But it's definitely a fun question to think about and ponder about if you could start from scratch, which as you have the history background as well. That's not really possible. But
oh no. Yeah, it's not. So. Yeah, it's you're right. It's not possible. Sometimes I wish we could, keep all of our experiences, keep all of our knowledge, but then, create a new system. Because we definitely are supportive of teachers, both you and I. We really care about educational outcomes. We really care about kids and making a difference in their lives when it's pivotal. It's pivotal. I just made up a new word there, pivotal. And it's just their life hinges on these turning points, and we like to be there and inform them if we can and help when we can. But well, I guess we'll both be attacking the inefficiencies in the system. You in your way with Otus, I think that's great. If you're a teacher or a school administrator, certainly, feel free to look into that. they can they can find the solution at otus.com, right? Otus.com.
Yep, that's exactly right. Otus.com.
And then
Not the
how can
elevator
they,
company. This is Otus.com, the educational technology software.
sweet. And then how can they reach out to you, Chris?
So the best way to contact me would be via Twitter. It's at Otus Hull, Hull, which is my last name. Is kind of the best way to reach me. I'm on there. Also, we have a Otus K12 is our Twitter handle for the company. But yeah, either of those work great. I'm always happy to answer. I always like talking and learning from people. Always like helping kids learn. That's a big thing I'm still passionate about. Even though I'm no longer in the classroom, I'm still passionate about that. So always excited for any of that to happen. Any conversations that would be helpful for anybody.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much. If you could say, one thing to a kid who is interested in education, maybe their parent's a teacher or, for whatever reason that they're interested in education, but they also are interested in technology. Is there anything or any advice that you'd give to them?
Yeah, I think that, kind of not to go back to what I've been saying, but I really think it's just important to be passionate about learning. And if you really focus on learning what you're passionate about, being able to learn is a skill that will just reward you for the rest of your life. So if you're passionate about learning to code, it's like do a code academy, you Coder Kids, like get involved, get into Coder Kids, do that, and you'll find your other passion. If you're really into, teaching and education, it's like find something that you can teach. Like I know some schools offer like chess clubs, so you can teach chess to somebody else, or if you have a neighbor that you can teach something to. It's just finding those moments to being able to read, write, and think critically and independently. I feel like I'm a broken record, but those are the skills that are really going to transfer over. And getting into something like Coder Kids, it's going to allow you to maybe get in a neighbor to it, maybe get a sibling into it. And then if you love that, if you love showing people and teaching people, there's just so much out there that'll be, exciting for you, from client success jobs, helping people onboard and get, meet their needs, or becoming a teacher. I think being a teacher would be amazing. My sister is still a teacher. There's something that's unbelievably rewarding about having that aha moment. Helping someone have that aha moment is just priceless.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on the program today. Really do appreciate it. And until next time. All right. See you later.